morning and welcome to WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. But one woman who's in the headlines often and makes our community tick is Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysiewicz. She's back on the air for a check on what's happening with COVID-19, what's happening with the census, and what's happening in our state. Susan, so great to have you back. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you. Nice to be with you on this beautiful day.
So where are we talking to you from?
So from my dining room, AKA my office, and having lots of virtual meetings from right here. But I've just returned actually from Meriden at Hunter's Ambulance, where we were helping to celebrate EMS workers that are on the front lines every day, because this is National EMS Week. And I was just in New Haven at AMR with Mayor Elliker yesterday, saying thank you to the brave folks who serve as EMS workers.
Yep, it was good to see. We had a story about that yesterday. So you're visiting the EMS workers this week. And I know that it's a nice thing to show them that state officials and local officials appreciate what they're doing. What are you noticing when you go to these events? We're now 2 months into the pandemic. Are they working at the same load? Is PTSD catching up with them? And is there anything specific they need from you?
So, I think first, let me just say it's important to show our appreciation, just because I think now all of us have greater appreciation for the people who are on the front lines, both in terms of healthcare, but those everyday things that we tend to take for granted, like groceries and pharmacy supplies. So the good news is that I think that our frontline workers, particularly EMS, seem to have enough PPE. No one has shared with me yet PTSD stories, but I wouldn't doubt that that is something that could come out of any
They were
crisis.
talking to our reporter yesterday about how, they're in Connecticut. It's a little different from New York, where everyone was grouped together. So even though in New York, the coronavirus disproportionately hit people of color or working class people, everybody was getting it. Here, while all sorts of groups get it, it's really dramatic how different the lives are. So our reporter was talking to the ambulance workers, and they have family and friends who are dying and getting sick. We don't
Ugh.
have that many people in our circles who are. So they go to work, they think about it, they're watching the people who are really sick, the strain is bigger. It seems like things are leveling off a bit, but that's why I asked about PTSD, where sometimes when you're not in the shock of the moment where you just can't stop, whether then it starts catching up. Are we in a moment in Connecticut? You're around the front lines more than anybody, just going around the state. Have
Mhm.
things settled down a bit, or is it a false sense of security? What's your sense, Susan?
So I think that people are starting to see the gradual, sustained good news that's coming out of the social distancing. So we've seen a very consistent decline in hospitalization. So we have about 900 people in the hospital, down from several thousand. So
Mm.
that is good. We still see people taking precautions, wearing masks, being socially distant. That is a good thing, because we're going to need to continue that, because we're not out of the woods yet. And as you know, we're getting prepared to start reopening slowly, and May 20th, tomorrow, is that day where we start opening retail establishments that have been closed. We start having restaurants that will be serving outside and doing those outdoor things. So I think that the people of Connecticut are resilient. They're optimistic, but we still have months to go to get us back to a fully reopened economy, and and it's going to take us a while to still keep ramping up that testing so we can keep all of our places of employment safe.
It's funny. I think that while it was a bipartisan moment at the beginning of this pandemic, and I really think in Connecticut, we've done so much better than a lot of places in the country in terms of people running the show, raising issues, but really, really governing, getting along together. But there is this different red state, blue state, or liberal conservative view on reality as so many other things. People like me are very concerned about a second wave. We don't see it, a lot of us, as a few months away from gradually reopening. We see a second wave hitting from people not being careful enough and reopening too fast. But we're not right. That's guesswork based on the same data that equally intelligent, compassionate people look at the same data and say, we can avoid some of the pain from not reopening things and move ahead.
I
Which
think I
reality is right? Can't we
Yeah,
tell?
and here's what I would say. I think it's fair to say there are about a third of the people who think that we should have reopened sooner. I think a third of the people feel like, we're getting it about right, and a third of the people think, put it off. And so I think, what the governor has been trying to do is strike the right balance. But I think that one thing you can say is, in striking that balance, the governor and I have tried to really focus on the public health, because that's really got to be the first and foremost thing on our mind. So we know the economy is important, and we want to get that going. At the same time, people's health and safety is first.
Uh-huh. And we're talking to Susan Bysiewicz, Lieutenant Governor, who's at the top of the state government, working on gradually reopening our economy and also getting the census out, which we're going to talk a little bit later in the hour. Susan, another really interesting day you had, at least it sounded like, was last Thursday, because you checked on two ends of the food chain. And again, liberals like me who look at the same data, and we're more pessimistic these days, even though sometimes the left is more optimistic about possibilities. We're very concerned about people being able to eat with an extended recession, that we're seeing people waiting in line for food and feeling like it might just get bigger if you're not going to get your jobs back right away, which is one reason the other side says move open, open sooner. So you were at the Norwalk, Connecticut Food Bank. There were 39 tons, 61,000 meals given out. But then you went to the farm nearby. You went to Ciccarelli's Harrison Hill farm to talk about
Yep.
how farmers are shifting, because people, at least for now, it might change, weren't eating as much as restaurants. So people are throwing away food that was destined for restaurants while there's not enough food in food banks for people to eat at home. What did you learn in Norwalk, and what does it mean? Because you focused on agriculture.
Yeah. So a couple things. First, about Norwalk is it was very much the same as things we've seen in Bridgeport and what we've seen at Rentschler Field in East Hartford, is that because of the very high unemployment, some estimates it's in the 15 to 20% range.
For
So lots
Connecticut.
of people for Connecticut, and we've had over 1,500, sorry, 515,000 unemployment applications, which is just out of 3.5 million people, is a staggering number. And that's put a big
Wow.
strain on families. And so, on a good day, prior to COVID-19 in Connecticut, 1 in 9 people is hungry, 1 in 9 adults, and 1 in 5 children are hungry. And we know that that number has increased dramatically because of these food distributions. And the one in Norwalk, there were over 1,500 families that came lined up in 2 lines of cars, and the mayor and I and the Connecticut Food Bank, based out of Wallingford, were providing a week's worth of meals to families. And we know the need is huge. And the good news is people of Connecticut have really stepped up and been incredibly generous, either by volunteering or by making generous donations of all sizes. And farmers are a critical piece of food security here in Connecticut, because the governor and I were just shocked to see that some farmers in the Midwest were dumping milk and other agricultural products. We don't want to have that happen. So the dairy industry has been donating, Guida's donated 50,000 half gallons of milk. And we want to make sure that whatever is surplus is given to people who need it. So we visited Ciccarelli Farms, and we've been visiting farmers across the state because they're an important part of our food supply. And they employ over 20,000 people. And so they are a great partner. And because of changes to the SNAP program, and we've been seeing, by the way, Paul, a
And that's food
quadrupling
stamps.
number of applications for food stamps, and people get double the benefit of their SNAP benefits if they go to a farm market in Connecticut. So if they purchase fresh food from farmers in Connecticut, they double their benefits. So this is a good thing. We want to encourage people to be buying fresh, healthy food from Connecticut farmers, and farmers across the state are getting prepared for that. And Ciccarelli Farms received a U.S. Department of Agriculture grant to provide 500 boxes of fresh food a day, and they're going to be providing that food to needy areas, and that food's going to be distributed by the East Haven Board of Ed and also by an entity in New Haven, and we're going to find you the name of that.
Okay, so and before people are starting to send in the questions to you, Susan, before we get to those, and thank you,
Right.
everybody. So your role, is that partly coordinating the federal aid and linking up people that you want? You say you want to make sure that we don't have the Midwest scene of dumping the food while people are hungry. Is
Right.
that part of what you've been doing? Did you help Ciccarelli
Yes.
get that
So,
USDA money and then find the
so
people to give
I
it
didn't
to?
I didn't help him, but our Department of Agriculture and Commissioner Brian Hurlburt and his staff did. He was one of two farms in the state of Connecticut to receive that, and we're really excited about that. And I am working with, the governor has asked me to work with um, Jason Jakubowski of Connecticut Food Share, the Connecticut Food Bank, and Deidre Giffords, who's coordinating our food supply, along with the Department of Ag Commissioner. And there's been a big disruption in the food supply, because normally farmers would be supplying schools with food and fresh food. And they are still, but they were also supplying places like UConn, except UConn's not open at the moment. So, and a number of restaurants, but hopefully the supply chain is going to get rebalanced, because restaurants will begin this slow process of reopening in May, and hopefully on a fuller scale later in June.
All right, we're talking Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysiewicz on WNHHFM's Dateline New Haven. And thanks for the questions, folks. Danielle Velasquez asks you, Susan, small businesses are getting desperate to reopen because they were not given enough financial support. And now they're trying to force their employees to return to work or lose their jobs, meaning you don't get unemployment benefits if your person reopens, but you won't go. That is a tough one. We like to be mad at policymakers. We like to be mad at people, but there's some dilemmas here that don't involve being mad at people for trying to do something wrong. Which is, how do you figure something like that out? Like, if you're not safe enough, you feel to go to work, but the rules let you open, what do you do?
Yeah, and we've said to business owners, look, we're going to provide a framework, but just because we pick a target date doesn't mean you must open. And we hope that when you do open, you'll be in a place where you feel that you can keep yourself and your employees, as well as your clients and your customers, safe. And I have to say, I've been extremely impressed with the very creative ways that business owners are thinking about how to keep their clients and their customers safe. And I will say, for your questioner, um, the Department of Labor is processing thousands upon thousands of unemployment claims. And I think they're about 94% of the way through them. But if a person has a concern about going to work and being safe, uh, that is a factor that is taken into consideration by the Department of Labor. Um, so, this is something that is, really important. And by the way, I wanted to say that it was Common Grounds High School, along with the East Haven Board of Ed and the Council of Churches of Greater Bridgeport, that was getting access to the Ciccarelli
Thank you.
farms.
So if Daniel Velasquez question, so you're saying that if your employer reopens, but you don't feel safe, the Department of Labor will still allow you to get unemployment?
It may, depending on what the circumstances is, because it's kind of hard, there are all different kinds of businesses. But if you believe you have a valid reason that you won't be safe, you can make your case when you file your unemployment claim. And, that's something that will be considered.
Okay, so like I'm trying to think, and again, this is like you damned if you do, if you damned if you don't. These are tough decisions. I know that like you were going to open the salons, then you waited a couple of weeks, and I heard from salon owners saying it's not safe. And then you said use the blow dryers, which increases by 10, I think tenfold the risk of everyone getting COVID. But then they say if we don't open, okay, the competitor's open, you lose your customers, or if they feel it's not that if a sector's allowed to open, it's not so true that they can kind of not open as easily. And they're very concerned about getting the protective equipment. They say the
Yep.
state says, and I think the state's 100% right. You've given very detailed suggestions, graphics that we've run about how you set up your store, set up your barbershop, set up your office, put up this plate, put up this, wear these masks. But if you don't have the equipment, if you're a small business owner without the resources, how do you do it?
Yeah. So look, there are lots of issues rolled up into that. And 2 weeks ago, I had a virtual town hall with the Women's Business Development Council and their CEO, Fran Pastore, and there were 125 or so salon operators and hairstylists that participated, mainly women. And their contention was that it was very difficult to keep up when you're cutting someone's hair, styling someone's hair. It's very difficult to do social distancing. They were concerned about access to PPE, and mainly, as I pointed out, these were women, and they were concerned about childcare because, especially given that the school year is going to continue through June, and they're essentially homeschooling their kids too. So while on the one hand you had some hairstylists that were ready to go and thought we should have started even before May 20th, the Connecticut Beauty Association members, many of them feel like we should even start later in June for some of the reasons that you mentioned. So the governor and I listened. We've received, each of us, more than 1,000 emails from many of the members of the Connecticut Beauty Association, and we're told there are about 3,000 members. So we tried to strike the right balance of protecting people's health and making sure that they felt comfortable so that they could get the cleaning supplies and the PPE that they need. And there are a bunch of different programs, but one is the CONSTEP program, and the Connecticut Business and Industry Association have a program whereby if you're a business and you have fewer than 50 employees, that's what they're defining as a small business, that you can get access to masks and other types of PPE. And you can either contact Constep through our Department of Economic and Community Development, or CBIA, the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, to get that
All right.
protective
So if you're a
personal
small
protective.
business, sounds like they really are defining the small business as opposed to the SBA, which let 500 canes with 500 outlets be a small business. Go to Constep through the DECD, Department of Economic Development and Community Development website of the state, or CBIA, Connecticut Business Industry Association. We're going order here. Bob McCormick. Mac, thanks for listening. Does Susan think voting will be done by mail and online? There's an executive order coming tomorrow, right?
Yeah, so the governor, the secretary of the state, and I are aligned on expanding the reasons for absentee ballot voting for the primary for president and legislative primaries. And that primary is happening on August 11th. So I know that the governor's legal staff was working on an executive order to address that, because we don't want people to feel that they have to choose between voting in a primary and their health. And so we think that after this executive order is made, that that's going to expand the reasons that you can use in order to vote an absentee ballot. Because right now, there are reasons that are set forth in our state constitution for how you when you can use an absentee ballot, and those include illness, absence from town, religious practice, and so I think people saw what happened in Wisconsin, people waiting in line and getting sick as a result of it, and wanted to change that. And the Secretary of the State has been working hard to make sure that we have a plan in place so that absentee ballots applications first will be mailed to every Democratic registered voter and every Republican registered voter in the state, so that people can request the absentee ballot if they would feel more comfortable voting that way as opposed to going to the polls themselves.
Yeah, Susan Bysiewicz, Lieutenant Governor of Connecticut, on Dateline New Haven, WNHHFM 103.5, live stream, newhavenindependent.org. You know, a lot of what I'm hearing in New Haven, there's a lot of anger in the Black community because, and you read the story in the Times yesterday, nationwide, almost everyone of color who applied for small business loans relief did not get them. Those who got them, most of them got only a fraction of what they needed. And an estimated 50% of Black-owned businesses are expecting to close permanently because of it. Rodney Williams runs one of those small businesses, and he writes in, "It's sad that you and the governor say you care about the health and safety, but the minority businesses will be out of business. The focus is not about businesses staying in business. Our community will be waiting for the next elections. Why didn't people step up to make sure minority businesses receive state and federal? It's been a complete failure."
So, a
Thoughts?
couple of things. First of all, our state had a, small business bridge loan program, and in 2 days, we had over 5,000 applications, and those were loans for small businesses, and they actually went to small businesses. They went to several thousand small businesses, and it was over $50 million
Mm.
that was allocated to that program, more than any other state. Secondly, we have a HEDCO program. This is the
The
minority.
Hartford Economic Development Corporation, and that's specifically for women and minority owned.
Yes, yes, and it is also for people of all. It doesn't. It's not just to the Hartford area, so anybody can apply. And as of last week, the governor made the determination to go from $2 million to HEDCO for the very smallest minority-owned and women-owned businesses to $5 million. So the 2 million had already been allocated to more than 150 companies that are minority owned and that are women owned. And now there is an additional 3 million. So I hope this gentleman who has written that question will apply.
Yeah, and thanks for pointing that out, Susan. We had Headco on. We had the people on Headco and the people
Oh,
promoting it.
good.
They
Okay.
said there were a lot of barriers to getting, again, not people doing things right or wrong. There are a lot of barriers out there. Sometimes the hard people need the help most are the hardest to reach. So Headco, the state loan money went out, and I think the computer system crashed, or they filled up within 24 hours. And Rodney says not minority business. Our understanding from Headco from the state was the vast majority of loans went to women-owned businesses, which is great. It's not like we shouldn't be lending to women-owned businesses, but that as nationally, this isn't just a Connecticut thing,
Yep.
everywhere, that it's the Black and brown-owned businesses that were getting really almost none of the money. They weren't set up. They didn't have their financials in order. They didn't have quick
Yep.
enough relationships with banks to
So
get them in. So it's not like no one wanted to give them the money. The question was the
the
money
barriers.
didn't arrive.
So what I would like to suggest to any minority or women-owned small business out there, contact either the Women's Business Development Center based out of Stanford, but they have offices around the state. The Women's Small Business Development Center, run by Fran Pastore, they literally have more than a dozen small business development assistants who will work with the business to help them get through these SBA application process or the Headco. And that's important. Also, the state of Connecticut small business assistance centers will also do that. They will help those businesses who may be having these difficulties getting their information together to apply. The other thing I want to say, because you alluded to it in as you noted, a lot of them bigger businesses, right? That you know we need community banks, credit unions, smaller banks making those loans, because those are the institutions that smaller businesses are dealing with. And we want to make sure that those smaller businesses have access to the SBA program. Is it perfect? No. Did it get better? Round two, yes. And there may still be, people should still be in contact with their community or local bank, because as of last week, there was still funding available in that second SBA tranche of funding.
So we traced that in New Haven, and you're right. The second time they did the emergency money, they tried really hard to write it. It's always hard for Congress to write a rule to work in the grassroots. So they said $60 billion of the second tranche went to community banks. New Haven, we have one called New Haven Bank, used to be Start Bank. They did a good job with their borrowers, but even there, I'm finding, Susan, in my observation, that there's a disconnect from mainstream society and institutions, despite their best efforts, and people on the ground. And the more I look at it, the more I think that we need sort of not even task forces, like SWAT teams who are in those communities, not even officials at the banks or in the government, who know the barber shop, who know the mechanic, who know the repairman, electronic repairman or woman, and that they could somehow be the bridge. I just wonder if we could get teams of people in all our cities out to the people you don't reach to link them up. Because you're right, these people are in place. You named 3 organizations that have people that trust to guide them through. You named a community bank, which has a good track record, but even they don't actually know most of the people at the grassroots.
Well, another resource that I want to mention, because I think Mayor Elliker has been a leader in this effort, is there are a lot of cities and towns that have decided, on top of the SBA programs, the state programs, to put out funding for small business loans and grants. So the New Haven business owners should be in contact, particularly the smallest ones, should be in contact with the Economic Development Department in New Haven, because they're making resources available, because I think mayors and first selectmen know better than most how precious Main Street businesses are. And, in my hometown of Middletown, Mayor Florsheim and the city council has dedicated resources to small businesses in Middletown to keep them going. So, another resource for those small businesses, besides the ones that you just mentioned, the New Haven Economic Development Department.
And Harry writes in Chamber of Commerce as well. And Susan
Yes,
mentioned
yes,
Connecticut Business
chambers are
Industry
great.
Association. And we're talking to Susan Bysiewicz, who is in touch with small business every day as Lieutenant Governor of the state of Connecticut. She is on Dateline New Haven here, WNHHFM 103.5, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. Susan, it's hard to get people to focus on a lot more than one thing at once. You've been trying them to remember the census. The census
Yes,
is
thank you.
Well, and that was Jeff Klaus who wrote that in. Thank you, Jeff. He's from Webster Bank. So what's going on with the census? You've been monitoring the numbers. Are
Yep.
we, even though we can't go out and knock on people's doors and have a really vibrant office where people are working, you set up all these community teams before the pandemic hit. You were, back in all those towns you used to go to ask for votes, you were back getting citizen committees forming a year in advance. You had them saying, we're going to go out there. The office was set up. We were on Elm Street, and then boom, pandemic, can't
Yep.
move. So then you
And
virtual.
we are seeing the fruits of our labor, because the national response rate, and the self-response rate is the households who responded either online or by the 800 number, or filled out the paper form, which went out end of April. So the national rate was 59%. Connecticut is ahead of the national response rate average. As of yesterday at 3 p.m., we were at 63.2%. So we continue to lead New England, lead all the states around us, and the New Haven County response rate is 61%, and the city of New Haven response rate is 46.5%. So
Cities always have lower, which is
yes,
why we
they
put
do. Yes,
extra
they do.
effort.
But you are higher than Hartford for sure. And I think that the reason New Haven is doing better than some of the other large cities is because you had a very vibrant effort set up when Mayor Harp started and continued by Mayor Elliker. You had an early effort, and interesting things have been happening. Like there are census caravans, small car parades that are driving around New Haven, reminding people to fill those out. But cities.
Yeah, we had fun going to one with Joe Ugly in the Morning rap crew. We went on one of their caravans.
Oh, fun.
It's how much are they reaching people, Susan? Can we get the New Haven numbers up so that we're fully counted?
Yeah, we're gonna have to. And one thing that will happen right now around August 11th is that the U.S. Census Bureau is going to be sending out their door knocking enumeration operation starting around that time. And that's going to be the follow on to everything that we're doing. Now, the next big milestone for us will be the 69.5% rate, because that was our self-response rate before any of the door knocking activities started in 2010. So we are almost there, right? We're getting close to that. We're about 5.5 points away, give or take, to that. And we're going to have to continue to work hard to get ourselves up to that. But I think we can do that prior to the August 11th.
Will we be able to knock on doors at August 11th? Because you really can't do that now, right?
Well, we're going to have to do it, assuming the Census Bureau still thinks that it's safe for people to do it. And I'm sure that would involve PPE and keeping a 6-foot distance. So,
all right. And Jeff Klaus is writing in with information. Jeff Klaus writes in, excuse me, it's hard with Zoom sometimes because we're on delay. So I
Right.
apologize for interrupting. Although when we get rid of Zoom, I wonder what excuse I'll come up with for interrupting. Anyway, Jeff Klaus says Social Venture Partners, Yale Law School Clinic. So Yale Law School Clinic has something called Social Venture Partners, which is trying to help small business get money. And he notes that Howard K. Hill, African American funeral home owner, is the vice chair of the New Haven Chamber, and so that's
Oh,
that.
thank
Now,
you. Those
I
are
know that
good
you
resources.
talked about in New Haven, you feel that work we did before the pandemic to lay the groundwork for the census is paying off. It does sound like some work we did financing the state is paying off. We hear only bad news, but Moody's, which is one of the rating agencies, made Connecticut only one of 7 states out of 50 that they're rating as good to invest in by buying bonds. The reason they give, and tell me if I understand this right, is because we're way above the actuarial minimum for our rainy day funds. So government's always, both parties in the past rated rainy day funds. That's
Mhm.
the money you set aside for if there's a crisis, and we're now in the worst crisis in more than a century. And the Mon administration did hold fast to keeping a high level of rainy aid fund. There was a debate last year about using some of it for transportation. The answer was no. That was the basis Moody gave. So what
Right.
does that mean in terms of our ability to move forward? Does it mean we borrow money for less of an interest rate so we don't have to spend as much going forward? Does it mean anything about our pension liabilities? What are how are our finances going to be impacted by this?
So, first of all, I think the reason that we got such a hot rating from Moody's was because we had $2.5 billion in our rainy day fund, which is about 15% of our budget. And I think that puts us in a better position than most states because most states have had to spend uh, millions and or billions to deal with the COVID-19 epidemic. So going into the June 2020 fiscal year, we'll be at a deficit of about 573 million. And we have a projected deficit for 2021 just because when you have retail establishments not being open and sales tax not being collected, the stock market being down and people paying less in capital gains to the state, so many people unemployed, you have less revenue. So those are the projections that we're looking at, and we're looking at recovery coming in late 2021, 22. Um, those are the
So for the next
projections
18 months, you said $500 million deficit for this
for.
fiscal year.
Mhm.
And I know it's really guesswork because we don't know what's going to happen when there's a vaccine, when things be open. What is the conservative estimate of a deficit for the next fiscal year?
2 billion, 2
So
billion.
if you had so you're saying we're going to have a 2.5 billion deficit over the next 18 months. Can we just say we have 25 billion in the rainy day fund that we could just say that's going to cover the deficit so we don't have to cut the hell out of nonprofits and we'll still have more
I
than the
think that
actuarial
would,
minimum?
I think the goal would be that we would not have to cut funding to municipalities for education that they rely upon. The goal would be not to cut nonprofits because they are struggling given the pandemic. They're not able to do the fundraising that they normally do. And so that's why, we've been really trying as a state to maximize the reimbursement that we get from FEMA. But I have to say that, to be recognized as a state with one of the highest rainy day funds is a really good thing. And I
It is.
know that Melissa McCaw, our OPM budget director, is doing now, looking at whatever mitigation that she can do to try to make sure that we stay in the positive column. But it's very difficult. And, usually when we have recessions or economic downturns, it could take a couple of years to get back to normal.
All right. Susan Bysiewicz, Lieutenant Governor, Dateline, New Haven, WNHHFM. Uh, Kids have a lot of times on their hands right now, even if they're, especially places not doing a lot of online learning.
I got
You've
a
launched
project for them.
you're calling it the statewide COVID computing challenge.
Right.
You're asking the kids by May 29th to pick up some global concern. And then what are you asking them to do?
So we're asking students across Connecticut from third to 12th grade to give us ideas for a computer program, a computer app that would help educate people about the COVID epidemic, that would help keep people safe, for all kinds of ideas to address this crisis. And I will tell you, we've received hundreds of submissions already, and we've been just very impressed with some of the ideas that we've seen so far. So if there are students out there, again, from third through 12th grade, they can work in teams or individually work on an idea that helps with any aspect of the crisis. And we've just been impressed with the creativity and the scope of the different ideas that we've got.
What would be one idea that stands out to you?
Well, there was one person who came up with an idea to let people know where the different testing sites across the state were. And we were impressed with that, for example. That gave everybody more information. That's one example.
All right, you got the kids thinking and learning. What's the prize?
It is recognition. It is
right.
recognition. If it's anything beyond that, I think it's we've been working with the superintendents of schools across the state, because we think it's really important for kids to have STEM training: science, technology, engineering, math, and to have good computer skills. And a lot of kids think it's fun to use computers. And so we're encouraging kids, and people have another 10 days to get us all the ideas. They can go to our website or the Department of Education website to get more information about the rules and requirements.
By our website, you mean Secretary of the State?
No, Lieutenant Governor.
I'm sorry, Lieutenant Governor, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Lieutenant Governor. And one last question before I let you go. Jeff says, why not cut back the tier 1 pensions of over $100,000 per year? These are unaffordable. Are you allowed to do that under collective bargaining rules?
I think we would have to change the collective bargaining rules. And I would say this to the person who wrote in: the average annual pension is about $30,000 a year. And I know there are some people that get, there are a few people that get a lot more, but the average is 30,000.
All right. Susan Bysiewicz, what a treat to check in with you. Thanks for making time for coming to join us.
The questions were fun too. Appreciate
questions from the public. These are tough times, tough decisions, and you're in the middle of them, weighing the options and making the decisions. Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysiewicz. And I want to also thank everyone listening, and thank to Harry Drost, WNHA station manager, the miracle man behind the controls, who gets us on every social media platform known to man and woman. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free, from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night here at WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community.